Good morning, everyone, and welcome to St. Andrew's Episcopal School. We're on our North Campus up in Ridgeland, and I am Stephanie Strickland Garriga. I am the Assistant Head of School here for Advancement and Community Relations, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our very first Alumni Speaker Series, Coffee. This morning, we hope to kick off a series that will be biannual and showcase the incredible alumni St. Andrew's Episcopal School has sent out into the world. It's hard to find a field and not find an alumni who is at the top of it. So we want to share those stories and let you hear from their expertise. This morning, I'm excited to have the president of our alumni board, Taylor Triplett, class of 05, moderating this for us this morning. And of course, our special guest is Dr. Arjun Srinivasan, class of 88, with the CDC, and very timely that we get to have you this morning. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
In a moment, you're going to hear from Dr. Srinivasan. I do want to let you all know you can ask questions, and we would love for you to do that. If you'll just simply type them into the question feature, and then we'll be looking and following and try to answer as many of your questions as we are able. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our alumni board president, Taylor Triplett, who really you and the board are helping us sponsor this event this morning. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and Stephanie, thank you for the warm welcome as well. Thank you all who have tuned in this morning. We're so excited to be here. It's my honor to introduce our featured speaker for, again, our very first in this series of alumni speaking, Dr. Arjun Srinivasan. He's, again, a graduate of St. Andrew's, class of 88, and also a former recipient of our Distinguished Alumnus Award, which you will all understand in great detail why that was given. But since his time at St. Andrew's, Dr. Srinivasan studied at Vanderbilt. After that, he did his fellowship and residency as well at Johns Hopkins. Since then, he's become one of the foremost leaders in our country, and we thank you for it, specializing in infectious disease and the use of antibiotics to help with those infectious disease outbreaks. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here. Welcome home.
Thank you, Taylor. It's wonderful to be back home, and thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to Sarah and Blake for giving me the opportunity to kick off this series. What a great welcome home, and it's always good to be back at St. Andrew's. You know, I read somewhere that 6 of the top 10 careers that people go into today didn't exist 10 to 15 years ago. And, you know, even for someone like me who chose a very traditional career path, I've done it in a way that is also, I think, pretty untraditional. I didn't know anything about public health. I didn't know about careers in public health really until after I finished medical school and had started my residency. So given that, I think it prompts all of us as parents and faculty and staff and administrators to ask, you know, what are we actually preparing our kids for if so many of them are going to go into careers that either we don't know about today or that don't even exist today. And when I was reflecting on that, I feel like at St. Andrew's, it's pretty clearly spelled out in our mission statement what we're preparing kids for, right? We say we are preparing kids for a life of service to our community and the world. Given that, you know, what are the things that mean? What skills do we have to impart to our students? And so I'm going to reflect on a few of the skills that I think St. Andrew's does a phenomenal job of imparting to all of the students that leave here. The first is hard work, right? I think our teachers are not afraid to push all of us just a little bit, maybe a lot, past our comfort level in terms of what we think we can do. I learned at St. Andrew's how much you actually can do if you're willing to work for it. And I think every student who leaves here leaves with that realization that if you're willing to work at it, you can do things that you never thought that you could do. The second is we really teach our kids to embrace and nurture curiosity. And that is, I think, so fundamentally important to life. You can accomplish so much if you're curious about why things are. You know, there was never a bad question at St. Andrew's, and I bet that's still the case. We had so many discussions in our classrooms that were what we thought were digressions from what we were actually supposed to be learning. You know, we thought we were pulling one over on Dan Rose or Charles Weeks and getting them to talk about stuff that wasn't related to the subject, but, you know, they knew better, right? It was all related to the subject. And what they were doing was instilling that curiosity. They were encouraging that curiosity in us. And, every question then only led to more questions. And what a great way to be able to approach life. The other is acceptance. There was a great column that came out while I was a student at St. Andrews, and there was a quote in the column, and it went something like, St. Andrews is a place where it's cool to be smart and okay to be weird. And what a great synopsis of our school, right? I had a class that was full of this wonderful diaspora of personalities. And yes, by conventional means or conventional definitions, some of those kids, some of us were a little bit odd, but that was okay. Everybody interacted, and we, for the most part, got along. And most importantly, we learned from each other. And what I took from that is that literally every person around you has something to teach you, something to offer you, if you're willing to listen to them. And the last is empathy. We're a school in the Episcopal tradition. I wasn't a Christian when I was at St. Andrews, but I learned that what lies at the heart of that Episcopal tradition is the recognition that we are all beloved children of God, and we treat everybody that way. Now, I would readily admit that not every day do we hit that high mark, but I think that every student walks out of this place recognizing that that is indeed the standard that you need to strive for every day of your life. And what wonderful skills, what a skill set this school can impart. So it doesn't matter what career path your kids are going to pursue. What matters is what they leave here with, and they leave here with the skill set that's going to prepare them to do anything. So with that, I'll reflect a little bit on, how that prepared me and what I've done for the last, I think it's about 650 days or so. So I have done almost nothing but COVID for the last couple of years. I started working on COVID in February of 2020. And I've done that both for CDC and for a national task force headquartered out of Washington, D.C. for about the first year. And people ask all the time, well, what went wrong? Surely this was not how all of this was supposed to go. And I think that's right. And I think a lot of stuff has gone wrong. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that, we just never anticipated what a global pandemic was going to mean. And in many ways, we thought we were prepared. I mean, we had plans, we had drills, we had test runs during SARS and then during Ebola and the pandemic influenza. I really think most of us thought that we were ready, and we were not, right? There was no way we could have anticipated the challenges that would come with a massive global pandemic. The supply challenges, running out of personal protective equipment within weeks of the pandemic starting, the consequences of societal shutdown, the emotional toll that would take, the isolation that would bring, and of course, the attendant complications that would bring when everything stops and you run out of everything else, right? When grocery store shelves are empty, when people can't go out to get the things that they need. And I think the other thing that we never fully appreciated was the anxiety, the tension, and now what has become the frank hostility and anger that would come from people having to deal with all of this disruption in their lives and this level of stress for so long. I don't think any of those things were factors that we did or could have even fully appreciated going into this. Despite all of that, I think there have been a lot of really remarkable things that have happened that are cause, I think, for a lot of optimism. We've had tremendous advances in understanding the science of COVID and the data. There are literally dozens of articles that get published every single week on COVID. There have been thousands and thousands of articles. There is more data every day on COVID and what to do. And we are able to take care of patients today in a way that we weren't a year or 2 years ago with COVID. We're saving lives of people who have COVID that we couldn't have saved at the start. And that is remarkable. We have drugs and we have vaccines that are remarkably effective. And normally those take years and years to produce. A new drug, a new vaccine, most of those take in the neighborhood of a decade to go from an idea to an actual product that you can give to someone. we've had those within a year, less than a year for the first medication to be approved, and just under a year for the first vaccines to be approved. Remarkable, and I think really unprecedented. And I don't think anybody would have predicted that either, the speed with which we were able to do some of those things. So, those are bright spots that have come. And, the approval just a few days ago of the vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11, I think that brings yet more cause for potential optimism. We're expanding the group of people who's able to be vaccinated. But despite all of that, there are still, in my opinion, a lot of worrisome signs ahead. I saw an article just the other day that hospitals in Colorado were full. There are ICUs there that are at 90% capacity. And the governor of Colorado is now authorizing hospitals to turn people away. That's not a great place to be. And, cases had been going down really nicely. But if you follow this, which I know many of us do very, very closely, the declines are beginning to plateau. It's beginning to flatten out. And we're flattening out at a place of around 70,000 cases and about 1,000 deaths a day. And that is a terrifying, in my opinion, terrifying place to be as we get ready to hit flu season. So through all of this, there are a handful of things that I've learned, and I'll close with sharing some of those. I get the opportunity to share some of these with some of the students this afternoon, and so I'll share some of it with you right now. The first is, I think we all have to acknowledge that politics is inherently a part of public health, right? Science and data can tell us what things are safe, what things are effective, and how safe and how effective they might be. But it can't tell us whether that means we should do those things, whether we should recommend those things, or whether we should require those things, right? Those ultimately all end up being policy decisions. They're made by politicians. And so we often say, the science will be our guide, and it can be our guide, and it absolutely should be our guide. But that's all it can be. The science can guide us to the options that we have, but then we as a society have to make some really hard decisions about which options we're going to choose and how voluntary we're going to make those options. And that is the nature of the beast, right? That is just reality. And I think it's really important to remember that as a primary factor, because it's important to understand that means that people can follow the science and still land in different places, right? And that is something that we have to acknowledge. I think we have to give each other the space for that. And we have to recognize that doesn't mean that person is stupid or is not following the science. It means that they followed the science and come to a different conclusion about what that means for them and how they would implement it. I think we can all do a better job of listening and understanding, building on that narrative, right? In the early days, I heard a lot of stories, and you probably saw these newspaper reports about, the vaccines have a microchip in them, and I don't want a microchip injected into me. And people are like, well, where does that come from? That's ridiculous. Well, it turns out that probably where that came from is that there were early reports that the boxes that the vaccines were being transported in did have microchips in them, right? Because they needed to track where those boxes were. And more importantly, they needed to monitor the temperature, because the vaccines had to be kept at a certain temperature. So for a lot of people, what it turned out, they misunderstood that, the box has a microchip in it. And that got somehow translated to the vaccine has a microchip in it, right? So rather than hearing that and saying, well, you're wrong, you don't understand, it doesn't. When we took the time, and there were some social scientists who took the time to actually listen and say, well, tell me why you think that. What has led you to believe that? They were the ones who were successful in uncovering this. And sure, it didn't convince everyone, but I think we were certainly able to convince a lot more people that the vaccine didn't have a microchip by listening and explaining, well, here's why I think you think that and why that's wrong, rather than simply telling them, you don't understand, you don't get it. The other is I think we have to do a better job of acknowledging uncertainty. There is a lot of uncertainty. No one knows what's to come with the pandemic. And any time that we are too certain about the things that we know, we end up being wrong. And when we're certain about what we know and we're wrong, people lose confidence in us. I think it's so important to acknowledge, these are the things we know, but these are the things we don't know. And it's okay to be anxious about the things that you don't know, right? That's unknowns are always a source of anxiety. I've talked to a lot of people about whether or not they should get the vaccine. And a lot of them ask, well, what about 5 years or 10 years from now? What are the potential complications from this vaccine? And, I answer that, I'll tell people, well, here's what I know. These mRNA vaccines, this technology has existed for a very, very long time. It's been around for decades. And it's been used in studies, but it is fair to say that we've never had coronavirus mRNA vaccines before. So yeah, we don't have 10 years, 5 years of experience with this vaccine. So it would be wrong for me to tell you, absolutely, we know for a certainty that there's no issue with this down the road, when in reality, I don't have the evidence or the basis to say that. And what I have found is that far from making people less likely to get the vaccine, when someone acknowledges that uncertainty that they're expressing and gives voice to it and says, it's okay. I can tell you that we know a lot about the technology. The technology has appeared to be very, very safe. And I know from these studies that the vaccine is remarkably effective. And if you do the numbers, you're much more likely to suffer something, have a bad event from having COVID than you are from getting the vaccine. So given all of that, I would recommend it. I take it. I had my kids take it. The people I love in my life have all gotten it. But that's a much better way to have that discussion. So it's listening to people and understanding what they're coming from. And I think finally, we all need to do a better job of recognizing when we get things wrong. And I can tell you that, in the government, we don't always do a great job of that. We want to be right. And so, if you go back to the early days, the recommendations for wearing masks out in public, right? We told you not to wear a mask. The Surgeon General was on TV telling people, don't wear a mask out in public, right? They don't work. They're not effective. Well, it turns out that wasn't quite right. So we had to reverse ourselves, right? We now tell you, absolutely wear a mask when you're out in public. Everybody should wear a mask out in public. And now, of course, we're fighting endlessly about that. But it would have been crazy not to change that recommendation. But I think we owe it to people to say, hey, you know what? We were wrong. Right? We thought that it was not a good idea to wear a mask out in public. We didn't think they were effective. And moreover, we were worried that we didn't have enough of them. And we really wanted to preserve the supplies that we had for our healthcare workers. And we didn't have the cloth masks and the things that we had now. People will understand that circumstances change. And I think if you acknowledge this is what we knew then, and this is what we thought then, and so this is what we said then, but now things are different. And so now I am telling you that thing I told you to do before, told you not to do before, I want you to do now. Here's why I told you that before, and here's why I'm changing my mind now. And I'll leave you with a quote that I'm going to share with the kids. It happens to be a quote from the president of my other alma mater, Davidson College. He says, above all, we can model a humility that recognizes how the best intentions can lead to bad outcomes and how even our most deeply held convictions could be wrong. And I think that is the lesson that I have taken and learned from COVID. And I think it's a lesson that I was very well prepared to learn because I spent several years here at St. Andrews. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for any comments or discussion questions that people might have. And again, if you do have a question, please feel to put it in the Q&A. Stephanie?
Thank you so much. And we do have a question I'm excited to share. So regarding the vaccine, is COVID the type of virus that will require a vaccine schedule, like some of the other childhood vaccines that we have between 3 and 5 in a lifetime? Or will it become a vaccine like a flu vaccine that could be given each year?
Yeah, Emily, that's a great question. A lot of it, I think, will depend on what happens and what we see with how the virus changes over the course of time. Flu vaccines change a lot from year to year. And it's the nature of that virus that it's able to change enough that a vaccine from one year is not going to be effective the next year. Coronaviruses don't tend to change as much in ways that really weaken our immunity. For example, the Delta variant, even though it was incredibly infectious, the vaccine was still very, very protective against the Delta variant. So unlike flu vaccines, we haven't seen the types of changes in the coronavirus itself that have required changes to the vaccine. Thank goodness for that. Could you imagine if we had to try to develop an entirely new vaccine for the Delta variant? The big question, though, so I don't think that there would be a change to the vaccine that we'd have to make every year if there were a coronavirus season every year. But that, I think, is the big question, right? Is what is going to happen in the coming years? Is coronavirus going to be something that eventually in the next year or so, hopefully, fizzles out and goes away and we don't ever hear from it again, sort of like SARS did? Or is it going to become like flu, where there is a low level of coronavirus that's around and every respiratory season, it kind of comes back? And there are kind of two schools of thought on that. There's one school of thought that says, well, the virus doesn't mutate very much. And so, once there is immunity within the population, it'll probably go away and it shouldn't come back because it's not going to change and mutate into a new strain that we would have to be worried about. And, there are others who say, well, we just don't know, the virus could mutate, it could change. It's been around long enough and hasn't changed in a way that most people, I think, feel confident that it's probably not going to change so significantly that we would need a new vaccine. But the answer to your question is, we don't fully know that. And, that unfortunately is the answer to so many questions about all things COVID. I read a great article somewhere that said, the best answer to any question about COVID is, that's my answer today. Ask me again tomorrow.
I'd like to ask a question on behalf of our community and some things that I'm hearing. Of course, we have now infant all the way through 12th grade, but so we have a very large younger contingent of students. And this week, it's so timely that you are here. Of course, the CDC came out with a recommendation on the vaccine for children. And I think there are, like the chip, also things that parents, fears that they're dealing with and trying to figure out, is this the right move as a parent for me to make for my child? And one that I've heard is that our parents have expressed is the concern about heart issues, particularly in males. Right. It'd be wonderful if I think CDC even talked about
we do. So there's a lot of information on the CDC website about myocarditis. And I would encourage you, if you are curious about it and want to learn more, please do go to the CDC website and look it up. There's fantastic resources there, including links to the primary data. So if you're one of those people who don't want to take someone else's word for it, you want to go look at that data yourself, it's all there. There have been cases of inflammation of the heart muscle, myocarditis, particularly in adolescents, particularly in boys. All of those cases have been relatively mild. So even the children who have had the most severe instances of that, they have all recovered with treatments like ibuprofen and things like that. In the younger age groups, my understanding is that they did not see much myocarditis, or I don't know that there was any that was actually reported in that in the trial in the 5 to 11 age group. If they were, the cases were again relatively mild and passed fairly quickly. And I think what's important when you're thinking about that is to consider what the alternative is, right? So there have definitively been a lot of cases of really severe inflammatory conditions in children who got COVID, right? So all of you have probably heard about the multi-system inflammatory condition in children. That has led to very, very severe issues with organ failure, not just hearts, but lungs, liver, kidneys. So that is a very real risk. There have been thousands and thousands of cases of that. Kids who have been hospitalized, have been in intensive care units, and kids who have died from that. So I think when you're weighing risks and benefits, you have to remember that the goal of the vaccine is it's going to protect your child from getting COVID. And we know it does that exceptionally well, right? These vaccines are more effective than most any other vaccine we've ever had, right? They're over 90% protective against getting infected. So the risk of your child getting a serious inflammation of the heart muscle from the vaccine is probably far less than the risk of them getting a serious heart inflammation from actually getting COVID. And those are, I think, the types of risks and benefits that you need to weigh and consider when you're thinking about what to do for your child.
Thank you. It looks like we have another question. CDC has said that it's okay for adults to get the flu vaccine and the COVID-19 vaccine simultaneously. Is this true for children ages 5 to 11?
That's a really great question. I don't actually know the answer to that yet. I don't know if the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has weighed in on that as yet. My suspicion is that the answer will be yes. Co-administration of most vaccines is usually safe, but I would guess that there's going to be a formal recommendation on that to come. So that's a really good question, and stay tuned. I'm sure they're going to issue a formal recommendation on that.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Smash.
But I'm glad you're asking about that, because that is such an important thing. You know, we all need, it is flu season. We haven't seen flu yet, but it will come. So it's so important that, you know, in addition to getting our COVID vaccines, we all get our flu shots this year.
So, Doctor, I wanted to ask you, there's an emotional and a social aspect to this as well.
Yeah.
You know, our children's students were removed for much of last year. Now they're trying to readjust to learning again in the classrooms and everything else. Now, I know that you have 2 boys in high school.
I do.
Is there anything that you're telling them or helping them with to help with that readjustment, to lower some of those burdens and anxieties?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, I think one of the things that I've tried to impart to them are some of these things that, you know, they are obviously going to encounter that full spectrum of views on COVID at school, right? I know you have them here. Every place has them, right? You've got the people who are on one end of the spectrum who, you know, really would feel better if we all wore masks all the time forever, and that would be really good for me. And then you have people on the other side who, you know, never want to wear a mask ever. And I think what's important is, again, understanding that, you know, there is going to be this huge spectrum of views on that issue. And you have to, you know, you still like those people, right? They're still your friends. It's okay. It is okay to have that spectrum of views. It is okay to agree to disagree on what needs to be done. But at the end of the day, we follow the rules, right? So whatever the school says the rule is, that's what we're going to do. If they change the rule, we'll go with that. But that's how we have to manage this. It's a really good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, and please, you all feel free to send in your questions. We've got a few more minutes that we can take questions for Dr. Srinivasan, and love to do that if people have other things. This has been an incredibly informative session. I expressed last night as we welcomed Dr. Srinivasan here that there's so many different, I think, things that have come up as a result of all of this, and it's almost endless, probably, the conversation we could have with you on the topic, but I do want to respect time and for everybody. So, oh, well, we have several that, of course, have come in. So let me go back to, thank you all for sending in your questions. I know we want to get to what is on everyone's mind. So has this past season of COVID taken away from research on antibiotic resistant pathogens? And for those who may not know, that is one of your areas of expertise.
It absolutely is. So Catherine, thank you so much for asking that. That is a question that is very near and dear to my heart, because that is my day job, dealing with antibiotic resistance, which, you know, remains an incredibly important and serious problem. You know, roughly 30,000 people in this country die every year from infections that are caused by bacteria that we should be able to treat with antibiotics, that we can't anymore because the organisms have developed resistance to those antibiotics. And that's a problem that is only getting worse over time. And the answer is yes. So patients who get COVID, who get hospitalized, are more likely to get infected with an antibiotic resistant organism. And so we have seen that happen. And what that means is that we have patients who we successfully treated their COVID, and then they died of an antibiotic resistant infection, right? And so that is one of the really unfortunate truths and realities of what's happened with COVID. And yes, it has slowed things down. You know, I think everything in medicine has slowed to some degree because of the drain that has been required to manage COVID. That said, you know, we are beginning to try to make our way back into that space. We are talking with and working with hospitals, some of whom have done some really innovative things to improve the way antibiotics have been used even during the pandemic. And that's been really impressive, that they have found ways to not only take good care of the patients, but also make sure that those patients were not getting antibiotics that they didn't need, because that, of course, exposes them to other complications that they can get. So it has slowed things down, but I think we look forward to getting back into that work. That is one of the priorities for all of us at CDC, is that we have really realized that we are going to have to be in a space where we simultaneously manage what's going on with COVID, along with getting back to some of the other really important work that we were doing before the pandemic happened.
Do you believe, as we weigh the risks and benefits of vaccinating our young children, that we should consider the vaccination rates of our local communities?
It's a good question. I think that can certainly be one of the factors that goes into what your decision process is. Although I would say, even if you're in a community that's really highly vaccinated, it's still, I think, important to get your kid vaccinated. Even if the community is really vaccinated, you don't know if you're going to have the unfortunate luck of coming into contact with that person who hasn't been vaccinated. And we also know that, even if you get vaccinated, you're protected from something bad happening to you, but you could still get COVID. You could have an asymptomatic case. It's not going to have any consequences for you, but you can still spread it to other people. And so, even in a community that's very, very highly vaccinated, there probably will still be people who have COVID. And now, most of us who are vaccinated, we're going to have the asymptomatic cases of COVID, right? There are lots of people who, end up testing positive for COVID who never knew they had it. And so that's what's going to happen now as we become more vaccinated. So I think that I wouldn't be lulled into a sense of, well, I'm in a community, 85% of people are vaccinated, so I don't have to get my kid vaccinated because the risk is low to them. That may or may not be true. And so I think it's still really important to consider, it's your own child's health. This is something that you can do to protect them. So even if a lot of other people have gotten the vaccine, I still think it's something that's really important to do.
Nice to hear. I know people are struggling with that question.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have heard is if you have the COVID vaccine and you get COVID, your case will be significantly milder.
Yes,
is that accurate?
That is absolutely true. We know that the vaccine is actually really protective, exceptionally protective at keeping you from getting COVID at all, right? So it does protect you very well from getting an infection. We also know that it does an even better job of protecting you from anything bad happening to you. So if you get COVID. So I think it's something like 95% or plus effective in keeping you from getting any infection. But it's well over that, something like 98 or 99% effective at keeping you from having to go to the hospital or having anything really bad happen to you. So that is really important to remember that, even with a lot of COVID, people who are vaccinated, most of them are not being hospitalized. If you look at hospitals now, the people who are getting hospitalized with COVID are overwhelmingly unvaccinated. I mentioned earlier that in Colorado, their hospitals are full, their intensive care units are full. Something like 90% of those people who were in those hospitals and intensive care units are unvaccinated. In fact, one of the medical directors in Colorado said, what we have here is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
So one of our outstanding recent graduates, Simone Weatherspoon, is chiming in, and I believe she is studying pre-med.
Awesome.
So Simone, thank you. She says, good morning. Do you always see yourself in your current position at the CDC or working at the CDC in general? How did some of your undergraduate and postgraduate experiences lead you there?
What a great question. I absolutely did not. I didn't know that this career path even existed when I was in college and in medical school. And even in the first part of my training, I did not know what public health was. And so the one benefit of the pandemic, it has certainly exposed a much broader segment of society to the field of public health. And it's been great. We actually have seen, in addition to a lot of people applying to medical school, there are a lot of people who are interested in pursuing jobs in public health. And so that has been really gratifying to see. And I didn't, I really lucked into my current position. I happened to be doing some work with the CDC when I was at Hopkins, and really out of the blue one day, the woman who I currently still work for called me and said, hey, have you ever thought about a job at CDC? And I said, I haven't, but it sounds really cool. And it has been. It's been just a perfect fit for me. And, I think one of the things that it made me inclined to this career path was, again, going back to your question, how did your undergraduate or postgraduate experience? So some of it is from what I learned here. I think that, people who leave St. Andrews leave with a sense of service, right? It's in our mission statement. We are preparing people for lives of service. And that's what public health is. It is a career in a life of service to the greater good. And that's what has made it so neat to be at CDC. CDC is full of people who came to solve the problems of the world. It's filled with wildly optimistic people who really fundamentally believe that they can solve the problems of the world. And that's a really fun place to work. It is fun to be around people who, no matter how big the problem is, they are convinced that they can solve it. And so that is what has kept me at CDC all these years, and is what has made me so grateful to have that perspective on service, to know that, most of us who work at CDC could probably make more money doing something somewhere else, but that's not what drives us, right? What fills us is the ability to serve.
Thank you very much. So lots of questions. It is 9:36. So we have it in our 45-minute window. We have 10 more minutes, and it looks like there's some great questions to be had. So if anybody else, if you'd like to get yours in, please do as we wrap up. From a parent of some young boys at our school, Morgan Schnurr, can you speak to and you may know what that is.
So VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. This is a system that is run cooperatively by CDC and FDA. And it's a really nice system where anybody who thinks that they have had an adverse event from a vaccine, any vaccine, not just COVID, can go into this system and report that adverse event in, and it'll be investigated. So it is essentially crowdsourcing vaccine safety, right? So it was crowdsourcing before crowdsourcing was actually a thing, and it has been around for a very, very long time. And so it is an open reporting system. Anyone can go in and report anything. Now, some of the things that are in there are probably not related to the vaccines. I've looked at some of those reports, and there are people who report, well, I was in a car accident the day I got my flu shot. And we'll look at that and we'll say, well, it's probably not related to the flu shot, but it doesn't matter because it's an open system and anyone can go in and report anything into there. And so the question is, yes, there are reports in VAERS, and is that data concerning? And I think every adverse event that someone experiences that they think is related to a vaccine is concerning, right? Anything that is concerning to someone is concerning. It is wrong to dismiss anyone's concerns. I joke about the person who had reported they had a car accident after getting their flu shot, but that was investigated because what if they had an attack of narcolepsy after they got the flu shot, and that's why they had their car accident, right? So those cases are all investigated. They are explored, and then we look at large data sets to see, okay, well, that happened. How often does that happen? Are there other data sources that we can look at to see, are there other people who are reporting that problem? And is that occurring more than what we would expect it to? And if it does, it gets reported. So all of these things, these effects from the vaccine, things like myocarditis, they're explored, they're reported. And that goes into the decision-making process. People have to weigh the pros and cons of all of these potential adverse events. And I would still argue that all of the side effects that have been reported for the vaccine, the risks of those are much, much less than the risks of something bad happening to you from getting COVID. And so I think if you look at the data and do the numbers, the safety profile still lands very much on the side of the vaccine in terms of its safety and efficacy. But it is still important to recognize those concerns, to explore those concerns, and to talk about them.
Thank you. Another parent and alum, Francis Croft, asks, what do you think, as a scientist and dad, are some of the ways to encourage kids that are really interested in science and medicine beyond sending them to a great school like St. Andrews?
I think it's to cultivate that interest, right? I know you have I'm going to meet with some of the InStar scholars here today that we've got these great programs. I think it's to cultivate that interest and to encourage you're interested about science or medicine. And you've got such a great network here of parents and alumni send them out to talk to those people. If they want to go shadow a physician. I see we have one of a good friend of mine, Laura Clement, on the chat today, who works as a family practitioner in a number of different nursing homes. So I am sure she would be happy to have someone shadow her to see what she does. I'm sure there are lots of parents here who work in labs, who are physicians, who are with the health department, who would love to have people. So explore those opportunities. I'm certain that Stephanie could help you find those folks and hook you up. But I think that's such a great way to really get people engaged, just to let them go and work with someone so they can see what it looks like when it's actually being done.
And to our alumni, and to your point, we are opening up ways to figure out where people are, not just in the local area, but around the country. We have an alum who's reaching out to someone who's at Google with St. Andrews, and making those connections. Our alumni board has been great.
That's awesome. Yeah,
and
that's
looking
fantastic.
at that kind of mentoring program.
Yeah, well, and like you were saying, Stephanie, I mean, we've got people everywhere, parents, alumni. There's nothing that people could want to do that there's probably not somebody in this community isn't doing.
And often
Exactly
at the
right.
top of that field.
Yeah.
Truly. A couple more questions. Let's see, this one's hard. Let's get it higher. Can you read that?
I can. Problems of repeated COVID testing. Does repeatedly jabbing the throat lead to scars or injury? There haven't been reports of that. If the testing is done carefully, it's been remarkably safe. There are people who have been tested dozens, if not hundreds of times. Lots of healthcare workers, people who work in nursing homes have been required to get tested. In some parts of the country, they have to get tested twice a week. And that's been going on for months, more than a year now. And we have not heard of any issues with that. So that's millions and millions of tests that have been done repeatedly. And so far, we haven't heard systematic reports. There are certainly the occasional reports of someone not doing the test carefully and someone having an issue, but that generally there haven't been reports of any problems with repeated testing.
Good to know. Dr. Srinivasan, I cannot thank you enough.
Well, thank you.
Taylor, I'm sure you'd like to add to that.
Yes, no, we can't thank you enough for your time today. I mean, Stephanie, as you mentioned, the talent that this school produces is unbelievable. And we are so grateful for you to take your time from your extremely busy schedule to be here with us today, not only to share with everyone here on this call, but to share with the students later today as well. I mean, it's truly invaluable. So
well, it is absolutely my privilege. I am so honored to be part of this speaker series. It is always such a joy to be back at St. Andrews.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will say thank you. You've helped our community since the pandemic started. He has been a reference for us to come to and seek guidance. So thank you.
Absolutely.
It's been a very important
my
time
pleasure.
to have the credible information. So thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to say a few things. First of all, I want to thank the alumni board, Taylor representing as
Thank you.
president.
Yes, thank you.
They have been so engaged with the school and are continuing to look for ways to better engage. Now coming to lunch, mentoring our students and our students getting to meet them and find out what they're doing in the world. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
As we close, what I would love to ask of all of you joining us is we do hope to continue this series in the spring, and share for us, if you would, in the chat, times that work for you. Was this a good time? Would lunch be a better time? Early evenings? What would work so that we can bring just not only our alumni community, who we do hope to be able to bring together, most importantly, maybe from all over the country, but on top of that, this is for our greater community, subjects that you'd like to hear about. I think this was clearly one that interests all of us. So please share with us thoughts about what else you would like to see and how this might work best in your day. I would also like to just give a quick shout out to another fabulous alum from the St. Andrews community, and like you, a distinguished alum a few years ago. But author Ben Wynn has a new book out, and he's going to be signing it at Lemuria on Monday at 6 o'clock. And if you all, let me make sure I got that right.
It's a Saturday.
Excuse me. Yes, Saturday, November 6th at 11 o'clock. Thank you for correcting me. So please, if you get a chance to go see him, his last book actually had a dedication to St. Andrews, and I shared with Taylor and Dr. Srinivasan that he graciously on C-SPAN, along with our alum Michelle Purdy, who has a book of her own that is wonderful, that they had learned to write at St. Andrews. So that was a wonderful boost for the school. So with that, we will let you all go. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I am reading your chats come through. Thank you very much. We'll make sure that Dr. Srinivasan gets to see all of them as well. So
Thank you.
thanks for your
Thank you,
thanks.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.